The galaxy was at war. Across countless star systems, the once thriving civilizations of the galaxy were being slowly crushed under the weight of an unstoppable enemy. The mysterious alien force, known only as the Cypher Dominion, had spread their dark influence across the universe, annihilating entire planets with ease. Many species were already on the brink of extinction. On one of these devastated worlds, the desperate cries for help echoed in the silent void of space. The last hope of survival was a single, final attempt, a signal. A signal so urgent, so dire, that it had the power to reach even the farthest corners of the galaxy. It was the signal that no one, not even the Cypher, had expected. A desperate SOS. In a remote corner of the galaxy, the civilization of the Cyra, a peaceful but highly advanced species, had faced the full wrath of the Cypher Dominion. Their planet was under siege, cities burning and entire populations displaced. For years, they had fought to protect their home, but now, they had no more hope. They were out of options. As their last bastion of defense crumbled under enemy fire, the leaders of the Cyra made a decision that would forever change the fate of the galaxy. They would not simply surrender. They would send out a call. Not just any call. A call for help from the most feared and respected beings in the galaxy, the Deathworlders. The Cyra had heard the rumors, the stories from other star systems, the whispered accounts of a race of warriors, humans, who had risen from a planet known for its brutal environment. They were survivors, adaptable to the harshest conditions the universe had to offer. It was said that no enemy had ever dared to stand against them for long. And now, in the darkest of times, the Cyra had no choice but to place their trust in these legendary warriors. The SOS was transmitted. The signal was broadcast on every frequency, every language, every possible channel. And it was not just a simple request for help. It was an undeniable plea. They needed Deathworlders. They needed humans. As the signal was sent out, the galaxy held its breath. Meanwhile, on a faraway starship, the Deathworlder fleet was on a mission of their own. Unknown to many, including the Cyra, they had already dealt with the Cypher Dominion before. Their legends were not just rumors. They were a reality. The leader of the Deathworlder fleet, Admiral Alexander Price, was a seasoned war hero who had personally led many successful campaigns against the most terrifying enemies of the galaxy. Aboard his flagship, the Ardent Fury, Admiral Price listened to the message. The first words that came through the fleet's communication system sent a chill down his spine. "We are on the brink of extinction. The Cypher Dominion is here. We need your help. Now." Admiral Price paused. His mind raced. For years, the Deathworlders had remained out of the galactic spotlight. They were always the shadow force, the ones who had never been asked to step in. And yet, here it was, a call for help that could not be ignored. He knew that the Cypher Dominion was dangerous, but the stories of the Cyra's destruction were nothing compared to the challenges they had faced in their previous wars. His eyes narrowed as he leaned forward, speaking to his officers. "Prepare the fleet. We answer this call, and we bring an end to the Cypher Dominion, once and for all." The Deathworlder fleet was ready. Their ships were massive, equipped with the latest technology, and brimming with soldiers who had survived the harshest worlds in the galaxy. But as the fleet set course for the Cyra homeworld, one question remained in Admiral Price's mind. Would they be too late? The journey would take several weeks, and the Cyra had no time to spare. The Cypher were relentless. The planets they had conquered were nothing but husks now, their resources stripped, their populations slaughtered or enslaved. As the fleet hurtled through space, every Deathworlder aboard the ships knew the stakes. The Cyra might be their first chance to truly strike back at the Cypher, but they had to reach them in time. Back on the Cyra homeworld, the situation grew more desperate. The SOS had been sent, and the hope of salvation rested on the unknown. Would the Deathworlders arrive in time? Would they be the saviors the galaxy had hoped for? Or would they too fall to the might of the Cypher Dominion? As the fleet rushed forward, The universe watched, waiting for the answer to a question that would decide the fate of entire civilizations. The galaxy's greatest warriors were on their way. But would they be enough? The stars above glimmered in their endless dance, untouched by the chaos below. But on the once peaceful planet of Arios, chaos had taken root. The world was on the brink of collapse. Cities burned, skies darkened, and the cries of its people echoed in the void. The Ariosians had never expected this. Their advanced civilization, known for its technology and peaceful ways, had been caught off guard. The Cipher Dominion, an alien race with no mercy, had arrived without warning. Their ships were like shadows, moving swiftly through space, obliterating everything in their path. No one knew where they had come from, and no one could stop them. The Ariosians were a peaceful people, with no experience in warfare. Their defense systems, although impressive for a species of explorers, were no match for the relentless might of the Cipher. For weeks, the Ariosians fought bravely, trying to protect their cities and their way of life. But it was clear they were losing. The last hope of the Ariosians lay in a single desperate act, a call for help. Deep in the heart of their capital city, a small group of scientists and leaders gathered in a hidden bunker. The council had convened, knowing this was their final chance. The Cipher were at their gates, and their world was about to fall into darkness. "Do we really do this?" one of the counselors, Liana, asked, her voice trembling. "Do we really call out to the Deathworlders?" Another counselor, Commander Vero, nodded gravely. He was a veteran of many battles, though none like this. "If we don't, we die here. We can't fight them. But maybe, just maybe, the Deathworlders can save us." The room fell silent. The Deathworlders. They had heard of them in whispers. Humans, a species known for surviving on a harsh, unforgiving world. A race that had faced the most extreme conditions the galaxy could throw at them, and emerged stronger every time. Their stories were nothing short of legendary, but no one knew if they would answer a call for help from a species they had never met. Liana approached the control panel, her hands shaking. "It's our only chance," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "We must send the signal." She hesitated for only a moment before hitting the button. A bright light flared on the screen, signaling the SOS had been sent. The message was broadcast on every frequency, every language known to the galaxy, a desperate plea for assistance. "To the warriors of the galaxy, we, the people of Arios, are under siege. The Cipher Dominion is upon us. Our cities burn, our people suffer. We beg you, Deathworlders, help us before it is too late." As the signal spread out across the stars, there was no turning back. They had made their decision. Now, all they could do was wait. Millions of light years away, in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, a fleet of ships moved silently through space. These ships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Massive, powerful, and armed to the teeth. The fleet belonged to the Deathworlders, humans, the most feared and respected warriors in the universe. Inside the flagship, the Horizon's Fury, Admiral Kara Price sat in her command chair, watching the stars outside the massive windows. She had heard of the Ariosians, but she had never thought they would ever call upon her fleet. The Deathworlders had kept to themselves for years, only intervening when absolutely necessary. But now, it seemed, they had no choice. "Admiral, we've intercepted an unknown signal," said Lieutenant Darnell, a young officer stationed at the communications console. Admiral Price stood, her sharp eyes narrowing. "What's the message?" Darnell activated the screen, and the words appeared, flashing across the darkened bridge of the ship. "To the warriors of the galaxy, we, the people of Arios, are under siege. The Cipher Dominion is upon us. Our cities burn, our people suffer. We beg you, Deathworlders, help us before it is too late." Admiral Price's face hardened. She had heard the rumors about the Cipher Dominion, but never had she thought they were so powerful that even the peaceful Ariosians would fall to them. Her mind raced. Could they really be so weak? Or was this just a desperate last-ditch effort? Track the origin of the signal, she ordered, her voice sharp. The officer at the comm station quickly input the coordinates. It's from the planet Arios, Admiral. It's in the Viridian system, on the edge of the Cypher-controlled zone. Price's fists clenched. The Cypher Dominion had spread like a disease across the galaxy, and no one had been able to stop them. Yet here was a species, begging for help. A species she had never met, but one that had clearly reached out to the Deathworlders as their final hope. "This is what we've trained for," Price said, her voice unwavering. "Prepare the fleet. We're going in." The decision was made. The Deathworlders would answer the call. They would not let an innocent species fall to the tyranny of the Cypher. They would fight, as they always had, no matter the cost. But as they set their course toward Arios, a question lingered in Price's mind. Would they arrive in time to save the Ariosians, or would they find nothing but ashes? This opening sets the tone for the story, establishing the urgency of the SOS and the Deathworlders' involvement. The stakes are clear. Will the Deathworlders arrive in time to save the planet, or will it be too late? The suspense is built around the unknown threat of the Cypher Dominion, while highlighting the legendary status of the Deathworlders. Time felt like it was slowing down for the Ariosians. The message had been sent, the call for help broadcast across the galaxy. The bunker where Lyanna and Commander Vero stood was quiet now, filled with tension. There was nothing more to do but wait, and wait they did, each minute dragging longer than the last. Every passing moment seemed like a reminder that they were at the mercy of fate. The sounds of explosions could still be heard in the distance, a grim reminder of the Cypher Dominion's relentless assault. The planet's cities had already fallen, reduced to rubble. The air was thick with smoke, and the once vibrant world was now a shadow of itself. There was no denying it. Time was running out. Back in the bunker, Lyanna paced back and forth, her eyes glued to the screen that showed the flashing lights of the SOS signal. Her heart raced, her thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of fear and hope. Could the Deathworlders really be the saviors they had prayed for? Or would the call go unanswered, leaving them to face the full fury of the Cypher Dominion alone? "We've done all we can," Commander Vero said quietly, his voice low with a hint of despair. "If they don't respond soon, it won't matter anymore." Lyanna stopped pacing and turned to face him, her eyes fierce. "We have to believe that they will come. The Deathworlders don't leave others to die. If they receive the signal, they will come." Vero nodded, but even his unwavering belief in their cause couldn't entirely push away the creeping doubt. The Ariosians had no way of knowing what the Deathworlders were truly capable of. They had only heard the rumors, the whispers in the galaxy's darker corners. Humans, the Deathworlders, were known for their savage tenacity and brutal ways, but would they really show up to help a species they had no connection with? The uncertainty was unbearable. On the horizon's fury, Admiral Kara Price stood on the bridge, staring at the stars in silence. Her mind was focused, but there was a hint of something else, something more personal, that flickered behind her cold exterior. She had commanded fleets before, led her people through countless battles, but this felt different. "Admiral, the fleet is ready." Lieutenant Darnell's voice broke through her thoughts. "All ships are on course to the Viridian system." Price nodded, her gaze still fixed on the galaxy beyond. The ships of the Deathworlder fleet were as intimidating as they were effective. Massive dreadnoughts, bristling with weapons and shields that could turn the tide of any battle. Their reputation alone was enough to make the most fearsome enemies think twice before challenging them. The Deathworlders were not the largest fleet in the galaxy, but they were certainly one of the deadliest. Each ship was a fortress, and each Deathworlder aboard it had been forged in the fires of survival. The stories of their ruthless nature were almost mythic, passed down through the ages. "Are you sure about this?" Darnell asked cautiously, sensing the weight of her thoughts. Price didn't look at him, her eyes still locked on the view of space ahead. "We're going to save them. We don't leave anyone behind. We're Deathworlders. We protect." The words were final, resolute. There was no room for doubt in her mind. The fate of an entire species was hanging by a thread, and it was her job to ensure that thread didn't snap. The fleet moved like a single entity, a formation of power and precision. The Horizon's Fury led the charge, its dark hull cutting through the stars like a blade. Behind it, the rest of the fleet followed in perfect synchrony. Thousands of ships, each one capable of destruction beyond imagination, sailing toward a planet they had never seen, with a mission they had never taken on before. Minutes passed, and then hours, until at last, the Viridian system came into view. The planet Arios hung in the distance, its once blue atmosphere now marred by the smoke of war. The Cipher Dominion's warships could be seen scattered across the skies, like vultures circling their prey. "Admiral," Darnell said, his voice tense, "we're approaching the system. We've got visual on the planet." Price's jaw tightened. "Prepare to make the jump. Get us close to the atmosphere. We're going in." The fleet moved swiftly, entering the gravitational pull of Arios with precision. The Cipher ships didn't notice them at first. They were too busy laying waste to the planet's surface. The Deathworlder's fleet had the element of surprise, and that was something that Cipher were about to learn the hard way. As the fleet descended toward the planet, Price's mind raced. This mission wasn't just about saving the dying world. It was about sending a message across the galaxy. When the universe needed warriors, the Deathworlders would answer. Back on the surface, Lyanna and Commander Vero continued to wait in the bunker, their eyes glued to the screen that showed the planet's devastating destruction. But then, just as hope seemed like it might be a distant memory, something caught their attention. In the sky, a new light appeared. An immense formation of ships, moving in unison, cutting through the blackness like a storm. The Ariosians could hardly believe what they were seeing. It was as if the heavens themselves had opened up, bringing salvation in the form of the Deathworlders. Lyanna gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in disbelief. They came for us. The fleet arrived in a blaze of fury. The battle for Arios was about to begin, and the Deathworlders were ready to show the galaxy exactly why they were the most feared warriors to ever walk the stars. The skies over Arios lit up as the Deathworlder fleet descended with unmatched speed and precision. The Cipher Dominion ships, so confident in their dominance, now found themselves facing an enemy they had never truly anticipated. An enemy that didn't fear death, that fought with a fury no one in the galaxy had ever experienced. Commander Vero, watching from the safety of the bunker, could hardly believe his eyes. The vast armada of ships that had appeared above their planet seemed like something out of legend. He had heard of the Deathworlders, of course, but seeing them in action was something entirely different. The Deathworlders didn't just engage in battle. They embodied it. Their ships, sleek and dark, moved through the atmosphere like jagged shadows, each one delivering a deadly payload of precision weaponry that obliterated Cipher warships with terrifying ease. The air shook as explosions rang out from above, and the once dominant Cipher fleet began to falter under the assault. "Do you see this?" Lyanna whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from the chaos unfolding on the screen. "They're unstoppable." Vero nodded, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this. This is beyond anything we could have imagined." The Cipher didn't stand a chance. But the battle was far from over. As powerful as the Deathworlder's fleet was, the Cipher Dominion had no intention of retreating. They launched their own counterattacks, swarming the skies with their remaining ships, their energy shields glowing as they prepared to defend their conquest. "Admiral Price, we're engaging the enemy in full force," Lieutenant Darnell reported, his voice calm despite the rising intensity of the conflict. "They're not backing down." Price stood tall, watching the battle unfold on the holographic map in front of her. Her eyes flicked over the various readings, her mind calculating every possible move. She knew that the Cipher were relentless, but she also knew something else, that they had never fought anything like the Deathworlders before. "Prepare to engage with all ships," Price commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. "We'll crush their resistance. For every cipher ship that falls, we send a message to the galaxy." The fleet moved as one, the Deathworlder ships opening fire with terrifying efficiency. Bright beams of energy shot across the sky, disintegrating the cipher ships with precise, deadly accuracy. The sheer force of the bombardment sent shockwaves through the atmosphere, causing ripples of devastation across the surface of Arios. Lyanna and Vero could hear the distant rumblings of the battle as explosions shook the ground beneath them. They exchanged a look. This was their last chance, their only hope for survival. They couldn't afford to fail. As the battle raged on, Lyanna felt a strange sense of pride surge within her. The Deathworlders weren't just fighting for Arios. No, they were fighting for the very idea that the universe shouldn't fall to tyrants like the Cipher. This was a war of survival, a war for freedom, a war to show that even the strongest enemies could be defeated. "Look," Vero said, his voice filled with astonishment. "The Cipher are retreating. Their ships are pulling back." Indeed, the Cipher fleet, which had once seemed so powerful, now looked like a broken shell. The Deathworlder fleet had shattered their lines, leaving their ships scattered and vulnerable. "Let's finish this," Price said, her voice filled with determination. No mercy. The final blow came swiftly. The Horizon's fury and the rest of the fleet launched one final, coordinated attack, sending a volley of energy blasts toward the remaining Cipher ships. The explosions that followed were massive, blinding light and fire consuming everything in its path. And then silence. For a moment, it felt as though the universe had held its breath. The once mighty Cipher fleet was gone, reduced to floating debris, their forces obliterated. The skies over Arios were clear, the blackened clouds of war beginning to dissipate. Lyanna and Vero watched as the remaining Cipher ships retreated in defeat, their engines burning bright as they fled for their lives. The battle was over. The Deathworlder fleet hovered in the sky, their ships still hovering in position, as if waiting for a sign that the planet's surface had been secured. They had not only protected Arios, they had crushed the invaders with brutal efficiency. They had shown the galaxy exactly why they were the most feared species to have ever walked the stars. Lyanna felt a sense of awe wash over her. They did it. They actually did it. They saved us. Vero's voice was hoarse with emotion as he looked out at the skies. "We owe them everything. We would have fallen without them." Price's voice echoed across the communication channels, calm but filled with purpose. "We've secured the planet. All units, prepare for ground support. The mission isn't over yet." The fleet, victorious in the skies, was ready to finish the job on the ground. The Deathworlders didn't just fight. They ensured that the battle was won completely. As Lyanna and Vero looked up, their hearts swelling with gratitude and awe, they realized something profound. The galaxy had just learned a lesson. The Deathworlders had proven that there was no force too great, no challenge too overwhelming for them to face. They were, indeed, the galaxy's most terrifying warriors. And they had just saved the day. Aftermath. The price of victory. The war was over, but the dust had not yet settled. Arios, once a planet under siege, now stood as a symbol of resistance. The Deathworlder fleet had left its mark, and the skies were no longer filled with the terrifying drone of Cipher warships. The silence was almost deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had ruled moments before. On the ground, the battle-scarred cities of Arios lay in ruins. The alien invasion had devastated entire regions, leaving cities reduced to rubble, their towering structures crumbled to nothing. The aftermath of the battle was everywhere: burned earth, shattered streets, and the remains of once proud buildings. The devastation was clear, but the people of Arios were alive, and that was all that mattered. Lyanna stood among the rubble, her eyes scanning the horizon. She could feel the weight of the battle pressing down on her shoulders. The victory had come at a high price. Many lives had been lost, both in the skies above and on the ground. The cost of survival was never cheap. How many did we lose? Vero's voice cut through her thoughts, his tone grim. Lyanna didn't answer immediately. She couldn't. The numbers were still being tallied, and the full scope of the destruction had yet to be fully understood. But the truth was clear. The Deathworlders had done what they had promised, but the price was steep. They gave everything to save us, Lyanna finally said, her voice barely a whisper. And we can never repay that debt. Vero nodded, his expression hardening with resolve. We won't need to repay them. But we'll make sure their sacrifice means something. We'll rebuild. The planet's recovery would be slow, and it would require every ounce of strength the people of Arios had. But as long as there was life, there was hope, and the Deathworlders had given them that. Above, the remaining Deathworlder ships circled the planet, their hulking forms a reminder of the power that had saved them. The fleet was preparing to depart, their mission complete. The commanders on the ground had already begun sending reports, coordinating efforts for the planet's recovery. But it wasn't just the tactical officers who had been changed by this war. It was the entire planet. I can't believe we're still here, Lyanna said, a touch of awe in her voice. We didn't have a choice, Vero replied with a half-smile. We were going to die if they didn't come. Lyanna turned to face him. But they didn't just come, Vero. They fought for us. They fought with us. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. The humans, the Deathworlders, had proven something powerful. It was not just their raw strength that made them dangerous. It was their willingness to fight for others, to protect those who could not defend themselves. It was their compassion in the face of overwhelming odds. The ships overhead began to slowly retreat, their engines humming with a low, steady power. The Deathworlders had done their part, and now it was time for them to return to the stars. Their mission had been a success, but the impact of their intervention would linger for far longer. As the fleet faded into the distance, Lyanna could not help but feel a sense of gratitude wash over her. She had known fear and despair before, but she had never known hope like this. The Deathworlders had proven that even the most unlikely of allies could change the course of history. I'll never forget what they did for us, Lyanna said softly. Vero placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression serious. We'll make sure the galaxy knows what happened here. We'll tell them about the Deathworlders. And they would. Arios would rebuild, but the memory of the Deathworlders' intervention would remain. It would be passed down from generation to generation. A story of courage, of selflessness, and of a species that defied all expectations. As the two of them stood amidst the ruins of their world, the truth was clear. The galaxy would never be the same again. The Deathworlders had changed everything. And for the first time in a long time, the people of Arios could look toward the future without fear. The Cypher had learned a hard lesson, and the universe had been given a warning. A new beginning. The legacy of the Deathworlders. The weeks after the battle had been a blur of recovery, but Arios was beginning to heal. The once broken cities were now filled with the hum of rebuilding. New structures were rising from the rubble, and the people of Arios were learning to live in a world where they could breathe freely without the looming threat of destruction. The Deathworlders had saved them, but now, the question was, what next? Lyanna stood at the edge of the newly reconstructed central square, watching as the people of Arios worked tirelessly to restore their world. Her hands were covered in dust, but her expression was one of quiet determination. The Deathworlders had left a mark on this planet, and now it was up to them to ensure that mark wasn't forgotten. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She turned and saw Vero approaching, his face serious, but with a glint of something else in his eyes. Hope. How's the rebuilding going? She asked, stepping forward to meet him. Better than expected, he replied. There's a lot of work left, but the morale is high. People are motivated to get their lives back together. We've got a chance now. The Deathworlders gave us that. Lyanna nodded. And we won't waste it. The message we send now matters more than anything. We need to make sure the galaxy understands that they're not just saviors. They're our allies. We can't let that connection be forgotten." Vero agreed. "It's already happening. The messages are being sent out to other systems. The story of Arios is spreading. The Deathworlders fought for us, not for glory, not for power, but because they saw us as worth saving. And that's a story worth telling." As they stood together, watching the sun begin to set over the horizon, a new sense of purpose filled the air. Arios was not just recovering from a war. It was building something greater. A new era was dawning for them, one that included a future where humans, the Deathworlders, and the other species of the galaxy could work together in ways never imagined before. "You know," Lyanna said thoughtfully, "I used to think we were just a small, insignificant world. But now I realize we're part of something much bigger. The Deathworlders have shown us that. They've shown us what true strength is." Vero added, "It's not about power or conquest. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves. It's about standing together when everything else is falling apart." Lyanna smiled. "And we'll make sure the universe knows it. We won't just survive this. We'll thrive because of it. The Deathworlders may have returned to the stars, but the legacy of their intervention would echo across the galaxy." Arios was no longer a quiet, forgotten planet. It was a symbol of unity, of strength, and of hope. And Lyanna was determined to make sure the galaxy never forgot that. As they looked up at the stars, the fleet of the Deathworlders was long gone. But their presence lingered. In the hearts of every person on Arios, and in the minds of all who heard their story, the Deathworlders were immortalized. The battle they fought, and the sacrifice they made would never be erased. Lyanna and Vero shared a final glance before turning back toward the square. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was filled with possibilities. The galaxy had learned a lesson, and the people of Arios had learned the most important one of all. Never underestimate the strength of those who will fight for the helpless. As Arios moved into a new chapter, they carried with them the memory of the Deathworlders, and the unwavering belief that anything was possible, even in the darkest of times. Unforeseen consequences. A new threat emerges. The galaxy had barely begun to heal from the trauma of the war, and yet something stirred in the shadows. A distant planet, far from the sight of the Deathworlder fleets, had begun to stir with uneasy whispers. For weeks, reports had been trickling in from across the galaxy. Small, isolated factions had started to become restless. At first, the news was dismissed. Yet, as time passed, it became clear that something much darker was on the horizon. Lyanna sat in a dimly lit room, surrounded by diplomats and military advisors. The table before her was cluttered with holograms of star systems, with detailed maps of planetary alliances and military outposts. Her fingers tapped impatiently against the surface as she listened to the reports. Reports of strange movements from the Zarian collective. One of the officers spoke, his voice tense. They'd been reactivating old warships that were thought to be decommissioned for good. Lyanna leaned forward, her brow furrowed. What does that mean? Are they preparing for war? Another officer, a seasoned strategist named Tarek, shook his head. Not necessarily. But their actions are erratic. They've been making aggressive posturing toward neighboring systems, testing the boundaries of their new territory. It's as if they're trying to see if anyone is still watching. Lyanna exchanged a look with Vero, who had entered the room moments earlier, his expression unreadable. Do we have any idea why this is happening? Why now, after everything that's happened? Tarek grimaced. That's the problem, Lyanna. We don't know. We've seen no clear cause. But the general consensus is that the Zarian collective is unsettled by the power the Deathworlders displayed. They may not understand it. They may not even be prepared for it. The room fell silent. The Deathworlders had left the galaxy in a fragile peace, but the impact of their intervention had rippled through the systems, awakening old fears and uncertainties. The Zarians, known for their militaristic nature and isolationist tendencies, were one of the most powerful factions in the galaxy, but even they had kept their distance during the war, choosing to remain uninvolved. Now that distance was being crossed, and the galaxy was once again teetering on the brink of instability. "Then we're facing something we didn't anticipate," Lyanna said quietly, her voice filled with a mix of concern and determination. "We need to find out what's going on before it escalates. If the Zarians are trying to provoke conflict, we have to be ready to respond." Vero nodded. "But we can't fight every battle at once. We need to tread carefully. If we push too hard, we might drive them into a corner. And a cornered animal is always more dangerous." Lyanna agreed. The stakes were higher than ever. Not only were they still rebuilding, but now they had to face the consequences of a new threat, one that had been quietly brewing in the darkness while they celebrated their hard-won peace. The Zarians weren't the only ones who had noticed the Deathworlder's might. There were others, factions that had seen the Deathworlders as a threat to their old ways of ruling, their old ways of maintaining control. They wouldn't stand by quietly forever. Lyanna took a deep breath and straightened her posture. "We need to send out a message, not just to the Zarians, but to the entire galaxy. That we're not just survivors of the war. We're ready for whatever comes next." Vero spoke up. "What about the Deathworlders? Should we reach out to them?" "Not yet," Lyanna replied. "We don't want to call in the fleet unless we absolutely have to. If we do, it has to be the last resort. We need to handle this on our own first." But as Lyanna looked around at the faces in the room, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer in control. The galaxy, once a place of simple survival, had become a chessboard where every move was a dangerous gamble. And this time, the stakes were higher than ever. The room buzzed with urgent discussions as the officers began to strategize their next steps. But Lyanna remained silent, her mind racing. The Deathworlder's intervention had saved them, but it had also awakened something deep within the galaxy, a hunger for power that couldn't be ignored. And now, it seemed, they were about to find out what would happen when power was left unchecked. As the lights in the room flickered slightly, Lyanna's thoughts turned back to the distant galaxy, where unseen forces were beginning to stir, and the echoes of the SOS that had once saved them began to grow louder in the darkness. The story of the Deathworlders was far from over. It had merely entered a new chapter. The return of the Deathworlders. A final showdown. The galaxy had always been a vast and unpredictable place, but it had never felt so fragile. News of the Zarian collective's aggressive movements spread like wildfire, and the galaxy's peace was beginning to feel more like a distant memory than a reality. Lyanna, Vero, and the others had done their best to rally support, reaching out to their allies and preparing for any potential conflict. But as the days passed, it became clear that the situation was spiraling out of their control. The Zarians, emboldened by their newfound sense of power, were pressing forward. They had started claiming territory at an alarming rate, and their warships were growing in number. It was as if they were preparing for a new war, a war to claim dominion over the galaxy once again. Lyanna sat in the command center, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy. The systems that had once been part of their coalition were now teetering on the edge of collapse. The alliances were fraying, and whispers of defection were beginning to spread. Even some of the smaller factions had started to distance themselves, unsure of what to make of the shifting power dynamics. "I never thought it would come to this," Lyanna muttered, her voice heavy with the weight of the situation. "We're losing the peace we fought so hard to maintain." Vero stepped up beside her, his expression hard. "It's not over yet. We still have a chance to stop them before they go too far." But even as he spoke, the truth was clear. The Zarians weren't going to back down. And the more they pushed, the more the galaxy would push back. Suddenly, the room's communications system beeped, signaling an incoming message. Lyanna turned to the screen, her heart pounding in her chest. The message was brief, but its meaning was unmistakable. The Deathworlder fleet has arrived. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Lyanna exchanged a glance with Vero. This was the moment they had hoped never to face, the moment when the Deathworlder's power was needed once more. The very force that had saved them before was now the galaxy's last hope. Lyanna took a deep breath, her mind racing with questions. How would the Deathworlders respond? Would they simply sweep through the galaxy again, leaving destruction in their wake? Or would they help restore balance, as they had once done? A moment later, the holographic map shifted, and a new signal appeared, one that could only mean one thing. The Deathworlders were here. The map showed a fleet like no other. Massive, terrifying ships, each more formidable than anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Deathworlders had arrived, and they weren't just a force of nature. They were an unstoppable wall of power, and their enemies had no idea what was coming. Lyanna's voice was steady, but there was no mistaking the edge of urgency in her tone. We need to send a message to the Deathworlder fleet. Tell them we've secured the outer systems, but the Zarians are pushing in fast. They'll be here in less than 20 hours. The communications officer nodded quickly and began relaying the information. As the message was sent, Lyanna turned to Vero. It's out of our hands now. We've done everything we can. All we can do is trust that the Deathworlders will do what they do best. A few tense moments passed. The room was eerily quiet as the crew waited for a response. Then the holographic map shifted again, and a new symbol appeared. The fleet was moving into position. It was as if the galaxy held its breath. The Deathworlders weren't just a military force. They were a force of nature, a primal, unrelenting presence that bent the rules of the universe itself. And now, their power would be tested once more. Lyanna knew that this was no longer just a fight for survival. It was a fight for the future of the galaxy itself. As the hours ticked down, the final countdown began. Lyanna's thoughts turned to the countless beings across the galaxy who had placed their faith in the Deathworlders. To them, this was the moment of reckoning. The moment when the galaxy would either fall into chaos or find its way back to peace. And as the first wave of the Deathworlder fleet entered Zarian space, Lyanna knew that this was it, the final showdown. There would be no turning back.